This is the video for American history for January the 5th, 2021. Now we're going to look at the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is going to look at lessons 17, 18, 19, and 20. For our purposes, 17 and 18 are going to deal with domestic affairs, things that occurred here in the United States. 19 and 20 are going to deal with foreign affairs, things that happened outside of the United States. Now, it was the Missouri humorist Mark Twain who is going to refer to these 40 years of American history as gilded. Now, gilding is a term that we use in jewelry. Gold itself is a precious metal, but it's quite malleable. It tends to bend. And so what most jewelers do is most jewelers make their jewelry out of nickel, which is a very hard metal, but you can then electronically adhere gold to it. But as you use the jewelry, the gold eventually will be worn away, and what you see is the cheap nickel that is underneath it. Now, if you go to a jewelry store and you look at, say, earrings, and one earring is 10 karat, that's with a K, and the other one is 24 karat, again with the K. All that means is that the solution that contained the gold was allowed to adhere to the nickel over a longer time. Now, in American history, on the surface, it seemed like everything was prosperous. Yet, as we study this, we're going to find that there were quite a few problems. Now, at the height of the Gilded Age, 1/8 of all the American people controlled 7/8 of the wealth of the country. Now, I think there's two ways to look at the Gilded Age. We can look at it politically by what the president does, by what Congress does, or we can look at it economically. We can look at it economically as to who are the people in power and who are the nots. Now, for 17 and 18, I'm going to try to put both in. The Gilded Age is the second industrial revolution. It began under Grant. Now, the tough question is, where do we start the Gilded Age? And most people generally like to start with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad under Grant. Well, what exactly made the second industrial revolution? The reliance upon steel, the reliance upon railroads. We call these heavy industries for a couple of reasons. Number one, the products that are created weigh a great deal. And number two, it takes a great deal of labor to complete these products. In lessons 19 and 20, we're going to look at what is called imperialism. Imperialism is where we economically want to take over an area, but politically we have no interest in it. Now, this is a big change from 1800 to 1860, when we practiced manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is where we take over an area, but we want it to become part of the United States. There will be a change in American society. Every 10 years that end in 0, we conduct a census. And one of the questions asked on the census is, what is your occupation? If we look at the census from 1860 to 1900, we will find that the number of people who live on the farms become less and less and less and less. And the number of people who live in the cities and work in the factories become more and more and more. There are going to be political problems. We are going to see that the presidents who are in the White House are quite weak. We will start with Grant and end with McKinley. And all of these presidents were quite weak. We're going to see that the legislative branch is controlled economically by the business tycoons. Those people who had money are going to buy elections and expect the legislatures who they have elected to office to do their bidding in the creation of laws. Now, the end of the Gilded Age is easy to understand. We are going to learn in August of 1901 that William McKinley, who has just been about 4 or 5 months into his second term, is going to be assassinated in Buffalo, New York. He will be replaced by his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt is going to usher in a large number of progressive ideas. So from 1901 until really 1920, we're going to have what is called the Progressive Era. Well, the Gilded Age begins with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. Now, the Transcontinental Railroad, we learned in the last lesson, was built by the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. The Central Pacific began in Sacramento and worked its way west. And the Union Pacific began in Omaha, Nebraska, and worked its way west. Central Pacific worked to the east. My apologies. This picture was taken in Utah, where the two trains met up. But for the Union Pacific to build its tracks, it had to go through the Great Plains. And the Great Plains had been given over to the Native Americans back during the age of Jackson. Now, the building of the railroad is going to hurt the Native Americans who lived on the Great Plains. The buffalo were slaughtered to feed the railroad workers and to delight people who wanted their buffalo hides to make up rugs or coats. In addition to this, gold was discovered in the Black Hills of the Dakota Territories, which is the very heart of the Sioux Empire. Many Civil War veterans are going to come west. They are going to search for gold. Although not many of them strike it rich, quite a few are going to come to this area. And of course, to do this, they must cross Indian land, which is going to infuriate the Native Americans. Now, in one of these areas, Wyoming, gold was discovered in great quantity. Mining camps are going to spring up literally overnight. There was a great deal of fighting between those who have and those who have not. And the miners decided that they would organize into militias, and these militias would warrant out justice to those who took over claims or stole gold. Now, these vigilante justice, they would arrest a person they felt who had offended. They would try him, and then in most cases, they would execute him. Now, these militias are going to come into conflict with Native Americans. Now, this here is Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull is the leader of the largest number of Sioux in the Dakota Territories. And Sitting Bull is going to start to organize the Sioux to push the various vigilante militias out of the Dakotas. Well, the government of the United States will not stand for this. And during the Grant administration, armies are sent into the Dakotas to stop the Sioux from incurring on some of these lands. Now, one of the groups was led by George Custer. Custer had been a Civil War general for the Union Army. He had risen quite rapidly in prominence. But during the time after the Civil War, Custer was looking for a way to make a name for himself. Custer believed that if he could defeat the Indians, he could run for governor of Michigan. He could serve on the president's cabinet. Who knows? He might be President of the United States one day. Custer decided to attack the Sioux at a place called Little Bighorn. That is a river body that eventually connects into the Missouri River. It is one of the greatest victories for Native Americans in their history. Now, this video here is going to talk about the Battle of Little Bighorn. Now, in your Google Classroom, you need to make sure that you get this map. Now, you will notice that there are 3 X's, here, here, and here. Now, this X, which is located in Colorado, is the Battle of Sand Creek. We'll talk more about the Battle of Sand Creek at a later time. This here is Little Bighorn. This X right up here. Now, the chances of you seeing one of these X's on your quiz is 100%. Now, these dots represent cities. And I think you're going to find that some of these cities are going to be important to the quiz as well. Well, after the Battle of Little Bighorn, the Indians are going to migrate into Canada. But because the Canadian winters are so cold, they will eventually come back to the United States. Once they come back, they will be forced to live on reservations. Now, the reservations are a plot of land in which the Indians are supposed to live. Now, the idea was that the Indians would create farms, just like the homesteaders, and that the Native American farms would be used to grow grain. But the Native Americans were migratory. They followed the buffalo. And so every time the Native Americans wandered off the reservation, the U.S. Army would have to be called out to try to force them back on the reservation. This is going to cause problems. Now, one group called the American Christian Organization, which was led by a missionary by the name of Helen Jackson, felt she had the answer. Now, Helen Jackson believed that Native American children who were 5 or 6 or 7 should be taken away from their parents. And then they would be sent to Indian schools that would be far away from the reservation. Now, this here is from Haskell Indian School that is located in Lawrence, Kansas. Now, it is a boarding school, and Native Americans to this day come to Haskell to learn how to be let's put it this way, they come to fit in with the white society. They dress like whites, they talk like whites, they adopt the white man Christian faith, and they cut their hair like white. But not everybody agreed with this principle. Bill Cody is going to bring the Indian problem to the East. Now, Bill Cody had been a hunter for the Union Pacific. That's where he got the nickname Buffalo Bill. And then during the Sioux Wars, Buffalo Bill is going to be a scout for the Army. Now, Buffalo Bill felt that the reason why the American people did not like the Native Americans is because they had never seen Native Americans or did not understand Native Americans. So Buffalo Bill is going to ask Native Americans to come with him, and they're going to put on a Wild West show throughout the American East. So they would put some stands up, and for a nickel you could come, and there would be Wild West shows, roping and calf riding and feats of valor by both Native Americans and whites. Now, Buffalo Bill is going to take his show on the road, and he's going to take it to Europe, and he's going to take it to Asia. Everybody knew who Buffalo Bill was by the end of the 1800s. but neither the American Indian Reform Society or Buffalo Bill was able to solve the problems. Tomorrow, we're going to look at that last X that is on our map, the Battle of Wounded Knee.